Murder at the Masquerade. Who removed the mask? The night of masks and murder. I should have known the night would end in blood. The chill of early winter had settled over the seaside town of Greywick, a place already heavy with fog and silence long before darkness fell. And on this particular evening, an evening carved out of shadows, the fog hung low, dense, and metallic, like the breath of something unseen watching from beyond the lampposts. It clung to my coat as I walked the steep, cobblestone path toward the old Castlereagh Manor, drawn by an invitation inked with a name that wasn't exactly mine, yet felt uncomfortably close. A masquerade, an abandoned aristocratic estate, under a moon half-veiled and indifferent. Nothing good ever blooms from that combination. Castlereagh Manor stood on a cliff overlooking the restless sea, its windows long dead, its ballroom rumored to be haunted by decades of secrets and old sorrow. But tonight it pulsed with golden light and murmured laughter behind velvet curtains, as if someone had resurrected the place for one final performance. I arrived shortly before midnight, the perfect hour for masks and lies. The moment I stepped through the tall, iron-wrought doors, a wave of perfume, wax, and damp stone brushed against my senses. Candles flickered everywhere, tall ones, short ones, trembling ones, casting distorted shadows against tapestries depicting scenes I couldn't quite decipher. Every guest wore a mask, feathered, jeweled, lacquered, carved, each a face over a face. And yet, I felt their eyes, dozens of them, turning to me as if I were the one spectacle among a room full of phantoms. The music, a low, steady waltz in a minor key, almost mournful, almost a warning. I adjusted my black half mask, ensuring it hid the small scar beneath my cheekbone, an old reminder from a case I never fully closed, and stepped deeper inside. I told myself I came only out of curiosity, but the truth was simpler. I needed answers. Someone had sent me that invitation. Someone who knew my name. Someone who wanted me here. I remember the moment the atmosphere shifted. It happened subtly, like a pulse skipping. A sudden gust flickered the candles. A hush rippled through the crowd. The waltz slowed, faltered, regained itself like a drunk catching balance. And from the far end of the ballroom, a figure appeared on the staircase. A figure whose mask gleamed like polished ivory. A mask with no mouth, no expression, only two hollow, dark eye slits. The master of the masquerade. Every guest turned toward him, as though compelled, hypnotized, or afraid. He descended the steps without sound, his cloak flowing behind him like black water. I watched him as carefully as he watched the room. If he was watching it all behind that blank, inhuman mask. Something about him seemed familiar, though I couldn't place why. But that familiarity twisted into dread when he spoke. His voice was a whisper amplified, soft yet unmistakable. Tonight, he said, one truth will be unmasked. Those words, simple, cryptic, shot a tremor through the ballroom. And then came the scream. A woman's scream, sharp and slicing enough to cut through the fogged windows. The music ceased instantly. Masks turned, candles burned hotter, and I felt my pulse lift as instinct took over. The scream came from the west hallway. Guests parted as I pushed forward, their murmurs following like fragmented echoes. What happened? Who was it? Not again. That last whisper, not again, clung to my mind like a cold hand. I found her lying on the marble floor beneath a shattered stained glass panel. The shards glimmered around her like tiny, twisted jewels. Her gown, a deep scarlet, spread around her like a dark pool. Her mask lay beside her head, cracked down the center. Her face was pale, too pale, but she was still breathing, barely. Her eyes fluttered, unfocused, until they locked onto mine. And in that instant, something passed between us, something like recognition, or warning, or accusation. I knelt beside her, my fingers brushing her pulse. Weak, faint, cooling. She tried to speak. 3 words, barely a breath. The mask. Her chest rose once more. Fell. Didn't rise again. The grand ballroom behind me erupted into panic, but I barely heard it. Because there, beside her hand, caught between the glass shards, was a clue she must have left behind. A single white feather, broken at the tip, stained with a thin smear of black ink. And then I realized something chilling. None of the guests wore feathers, except one, the master of the masquerade. But when I looked up, he was gone. Disappeared. Vanished. As if he had never existed at all. A tremor of unease tightened around my ribs. Was the woman pointing to him? Or warning me about something else entirely? Something, or someone, who had removed a mask long before I arrived. I pocketed the feather, but I didn't know yet whether it was a clue or a trap. Behind me, the room buzzed with fear. And beneath that fear, something darker simmered. Something heavy, like guilt drifting beneath the surface. One of these masked silhouettes knew what happened. One of them had seen the truth, and one of them wanted me to discover it. But why? The lights flickered once more. The sea thundered against the cliff. A cold gust swept down the hallway. And somewhere, faint but unmistakable, a mask hit the floor. Fallen, breaking, unworn. The mask that fell echoed louder than it should have. Too loud, too deliberate, like a signal rather than an accident. As I turned toward the sound, the hallway stretched ahead of me like an artery of dim candlelight and shifting silhouettes. At the far end, a door groaned open as if pushed by an unseen hand, and a draft colder than the December sea drifted out. No one else seemed eager to follow. That told me everything. I moved toward the open door slowly, deliberately, my footsteps tapping a measured rhythm against the marble floor. The closer I came, the more the air thickened with dampness and an old, dusty scent, like a library left to rot over decades. The manor breathed around me, each shift of wood and whisper of wind blending into a low murmur that felt almost aware. Inside the room, the darkness was heavy, but not empty. The mask lay in the center of the floor. A porcelain mask, white, with a single cracked line running down from the forehead to the lip. It was delicately made, too fragile to belong to any ordinary guest. And the design was identical to the mask worn by the dying woman in the hallway. Had it been hers? Unlikely. Hers was broken in the fall. This one had been placed here. Placed with intention. I knelt beside it, analyzing its shape. There was something odd about the underside. Something scratched into the inner shell. I angled it toward the candlelight, and faint letters revealed themselves like ghosts rising from years of dust. I felt the first coil of unease wrap around my spine. The one who watches what? The guests? The crime? Me? Before I could examine further, I felt a shift, like someone stepping into the room behind me. I straightened, my pulse lifted, but when I turned, there was no one. Only the long hallway, flickering with candlelight and echoing with distant murmurs. Yet I knew. Someone had been standing there. This place was saturated with secrets. Returning to the ballroom was like walking into a storm trapped in crystal. Panic simmered just under the surface, but the guests weren't running. They were staying close, clustering, watching each other through their masks. A room full of suspects who didn't know whether to fear me or each other. But one thing became clear. None of them were leaving. Not until they understood what just happened. Or until whoever caused it finished what they came to do. I took a slow walk around the ballroom, listening not to the conversations directly spoken, but the conversations deliberately avoided. There's a certain silence that betrays guilt, and that silence hummed beneath the string quartet's hesitant attempt to resume their music. A man in a raven-feathered mask flinched as I passed. A woman in gold lace pulled her shawl closer as though hiding something underneath. An elderly figure in a fox mask stood too still, too poised, watching, analyzing, waiting. 3 potential motives, 3 potential eyes, but it was the fox mask figure who caught my attention. Something about their stillness mirrored the manner itself. Quiet, observant, calculating. The kind of person who would hide a knife within a bouquet. No dialogue exchanged. Only the smallest tilt of the fox's head, as if inviting me to wonder. But I didn't approach yet. Not until I understood the words etched inside the porcelain mask. Ask the one who watches. Who watches? Everyone at a masquerade watches. but only a few watch with intent. The quartet had resumed their playing, but something was wrong. The waltz. It wasn't the same as before. Earlier, the melody had been mournful, low, drifting like the sea outside. Now it carried a sharper tone, one I recognized but couldn't immediately place. It bothered me enough that I moved toward the musicians, weaving through masked bodies and half-whispered theories. When I stood close, the first violinist's hands trembled, subtle but unmistakable, and their eyes, visible through the slits of an elegant emerald mask, kept darting toward the balcony above the ballroom. Not at me, not at the guests, at something or someone else. Their bow scratched a note off-tempo. The others followed, thrown off rhythm. The entire melody faltered, because the first violinist wasn't watching their music. They were watching the balcony, watching the watcher. I followed their gaze, and my breath paused. Someone stood on the balcony, unmoving, half-shrouded in shadow. Their mask was featureless, black as obsidian, blending into the darkness behind them. They watched the crowd like a hunter studying prey. The one who watches, the exact phrase carved into the porcelain mask. But before I could make a move, the balcony figure stepped back and vanished behind the curtain. Quietly, smoothly, as though rehearsed for this exact moment. I reached the staircase that led to the balcony, but as I did, a sharp gust of wind slammed the double doors at the top. Not wide open, just an inch. But that inch was enough to whisper a contradiction. Those doors always stayed locked. Every local roomer agreed on that. So why were they open tonight? And who unlocked them? The guests didn't notice. The quartet certainly did. Their music broke again. Something, or someone, was moving above us. I climbed the stairs, candlelight shifting around me, shadows twitching along the walls like ink stirred in water. When I reached the top landing, I found faint footprints in the dust along the wooden floorboards. Two sets, one light, one heavier, both heading deeper into the upper corridors. But only one set returned. The lighter set. I crouched, examining the prints, noticing the faint smudge of something dark along the heel of the heavier set. Ink, black ink, the same ink smeared on the feather the dying woman left behind. Not coincidence, not accidental, a connection. I followed the returning footprints to a long hallway lined with identical candle sconces. But halfway down, something broke the pattern. One candle was shorter, much shorter, melted down to half its height, as though it had been burning longer than the others. That shouldn't have been possible. All candles were lit at the same time. Guests confirmed it earlier. Unless someone lit this one separately. For a specific purpose. For a specific meeting. The wax puddle beneath, it was oddly shaped, as though something had been pressed into the warm wax before it cooled. I crouched, touched the hardened shape, and felt the edges of a small, angular imprint. A ring. Someone wearing a ring had leaned close to this candle. Close enough to burn it. Close enough to whisper into the flame. A code? A signal? A private rendezvous? The melted candle was a clue, but it wasn't pointing to a person. Not yet. It pointed to timing. Someone had arranged a meeting upstairs before the murder occurred. But with whom? As I stood, I felt an unmistakable sensation, one that prickled along the back of my neck. Someone was behind me, watching. Before I could turn completely, a whisper drifted down the hallway. Soft, genderless, almost tender in its danger. Not every mask hides a liar, but every liar wears one. I spun toward the sound. Nothing. Only cold air and flickering candlelight. But I knew what that meant. Someone was playing with me. Someone who knew I was following. Someone who wanted to guide me, or mislead me. A new question formed. Was I hunting the killer? Or was the killer leading me exactly where they wanted? The melted candle. The footprints. The vanished watcher. 3 clues. One truth hidden somewhere between them. One lie planted among them. And one question that the manor whispered again and again. Who removed the mask? The whisper faded, but its cold breath lingered down the corridor like an invisible finger trailing the back of my neck. I stood completely still, letting the silence settle. In places like Castlereagh Manor, silence isn't empty, it's layered. It carries the echoes of things never confessed, the weight of choices people hope to leave behind. The melted candle crackled. Wax dripped in a slow, stubborn bead. Something inside me tightened. Someone had been here. Someone was still here. Someone had spoken to me from a distance close enough to hear my heartbeat, yet had slipped away before I turned. Not many people can do that. Not many people should. I followed the footprints deeper into the upper floor, my hand brushing along the faded wallpaper. It peeled at the edges like dead skin, revealing patches of rotting wood beneath. The corridor curved left, then right, weaving like the spine of something ancient and carnivorous. Each step felt like walking farther inside the mind of the killer, someone who knew the manor better than I did. The deeper I went, the more the air shifted. Colder, thicker, as though the corridor resented my presence. Halfway down, another door sat crooked on its hinges, ajar as though someone had slipped through in a hurry. A faint glow flickered from inside the room, warm and pulsing like a heartbeat. It wasn't candlelight. It was weaker, softer, like firelight reflected through glass. I pushed the door open. The room once served as an observatory. The low dome ceiling gave that away. Dust coated everything except one item, a large, round mirror propped against a wooden crate. Its surface shimmered faintly, as though catching candlelight from a source not present in the room. But that wasn't what held my attention. It was the mask lying in front of the mirror. Another mask, the same porcelain design as before, cracked faintly along the edge, placed with care. And behind it, a message written on the mirror's surface, traced in something dark. Not ink, not wax, something thicker, something that dried in uneven strokes. I leaned closer. The letters curled like branches. The mirror shows what the mask hides. I exhaled slowly, resisting the urge to touch the glass. This was no random placement. This was no accident. Someone was leaving me a trail, a breadcrumb path through a dangerous story. But was it the truth, or a beautifully constructed lie? The crack on a mask mirrored, quite literally, the crack on the mask in the hallway. Same style, same design, but the surface was cleaner, smoother, as though handled recently, as though someone wiped it down. But something else caught my eye, a single strand of thread caught between the mask's inner lining and the mirror's frame. Red thread, the same deep shade as the gown the dying woman wore. A clue, yes, but one that could easily mislead. Had she been here earlier? Had the killer brought her mask here? Or was the thread planted to trap me in an assumption? The manor's quiet creaked like bones, shifting beneath floorboards. I straightened, pocketing the thread carefully. It might be a piece of the puzzle, or the first major misdirection, because any thread out of place can tie you to the wrong suspect. I left the observatory room just as a sound grated from down the hall, a dragging noise. Slow, uneven, heavy. It echoed off the walls like something being pulled across the floor. Not footsteps, something larger, something unwilling or unable to move on its own. My heart hammered once against my ribs. Then again, I moved toward the sound. Each step drew the noise closer until it stopped abruptly. Silence swallowed the hall. I rounded the corner. The hallway was empty, but on the floor, thin marks scraped through the dust, parallel lines like someone dragging a trunk or a heavy chair. The marks led back toward the balcony. So whoever had been here, whatever they dragged, wasn't going into hiding. They were moving toward the center of the masquerade, back toward the guests. A chill surged through me. Someone wasn't hiding their crime anymore. They were positioning it, preparing it, escalating the performance. And I was no longer just an observer. I was part of the stage. When I stepped back onto the balcony overlooking the ballroom, the change in energy struck immediately. The guests were quieter now, more fearful, more aware that death had entered the building and lingered, unseen, among them. The quartet's music faltered again, this time more noticeably. They were losing composure, losing certainty. Bowstrings quivered. The cellist's foot tapped uncontrollably. Whatever they had seen earlier had unsettled them deeply. And then I noticed something new. One of the guests was missing. The figure with the fox mask. The calm observer. The silent watcher. Gone. Had they slipped away while I was upstairs? Had they gone to join the killer? Or were they fleeing something even they feared? A voice rose from the crowd below, shaking but unmistakable. Someone else is gone. The words rippled through the room. Someone else. Another disappearance. Another mask abandoned or removed. My pulse picked up sharply. This was no longer a hunt for a single killer. It was a countdown. I descended the staircase quickly, only to stop on the third step when a smear of dark liquid caught my eye, glinting under the chandelier's dim glow. Blood. Fresh. Still warm. And beside it, a glove. Not a woman's glove. Not lace or satin. A black leather glove with a tear across the thumb seam. My breath caught, because earlier, very early in the night, I'd seen one guest, just one, wearing leather gloves instead of silk or lace. A tall figure in a silver mask. Stiff posture. Quiet demeanor. Their hands had trembled. I had mistaken it for cold. Now I wasn't so sure. I lifted the glove. The interior was warm, damp with sweat. This wasn't a planted clue. It was dropped in haste. Someone had left the ballroom injured, panicked, rushed. But why? Were they fleeing with the truth? Or bleeding because they were caught lying? The guests gathered at the foot of the staircase, staring up at me. Their masks jittered with fear like a flock of startled birds. I scanned their faces. One mask missing. One mask cracked. One mask abandoned upstairs. 3 masks out of place. 3 lies unraveling. 3 clues refusing to align. But the night was only beginning to twist. Somewhere in the manor, a clock chimed. One solemn note, then another. Midnight again, or the manor's broken heart repeating its own beat. I stepped off the staircase, holding the blood-stained glove. All eyes followed. Then someone whispered, "Who removed the mask?" No one answered, because no one truly knew. Not yet, but the truth waited in this house. Beneath a mask, inside a mirror, behind a door that should never have been unlocked. And the night was far from done with me. The ballroom held its breath as I stepped down the staircase. Candlelight trembled along the walls. Whispers crawled through the air like restless insects. Every masked face turned toward the bloodied glove in my hand. The silent promise of another crime, another disappearance. The manor groaned, a long, low complaint from the foundations upward, as though it disapproved of being awakened by death again. I scanned the crowd. One figure trembled. Another shifted uncomfortably. A third looked directly at me, too directly, too steadily. Fear was everywhere. But guilt stands differently. It breathes differently. And someone in this room was breathing far too calmly. But before I followed that instinct, something else pulled my attention. The wind. A sudden draft swept across the ballroom floor, snuffing out 3 candles near the entrance. The flame vanished not gently, but violently, as though pinched by invisible fingers. A collective gasp rose from the guests, and then we heard it, a faint metallic click, followed by another, then a slow, dragging sound. The main doors of Castlereagh Manor had locked themselves. Not one person had touched them. I stared at the ancient iron handles. They were infamous in the town's old stories. Handles that locked only from the inside, with mechanisms older than the manor itself. No modern technology, no simple explanation. The doors had sealed us in. Someone intended for this night to continue uninterrupted. A cold realization crept into the back of my mind. Whoever orchestrated this knew the manor intimately, knew its hidden levers, secret locks, private passages. This wasn't a spontaneous murder. This was choreography. As I moved through the guests, the crowd parted with the same mixture of fear and desperate curiosity. That's when I saw him, or what remained of him in the shifting candlelight. The guest with the silver mask, the one who'd worn leather gloves earlier, the one whose glove now rested in my hand. He stood near the far column, halfway hidden behind the velvet drapery. At first glance, he seemed whole, untouched, but then I noticed the details. His posture slumped, his breathing sharp and shallow, and his hand, the gloveless hand, was clenched tightly against his side. Blood seeped between his fingers. His mask tilted as if acknowledging me. Not an admission of guilt, but a plea. Not a killer's stare. A wounded animal's. I approached him slowly. When he saw the glove in my hand, his shoulders fell. A soft exhale. A surrender. Not to me, but to something inevitable. He tried to speak, but his voice came out in a hoarse rasp. No accusation, just fear. Fear of being misunderstood. Fear of the truth catching up. He lifted a trembling hand and pointed weakly, not at a person, but at the ceiling, the upper floor, where footprints and melted candles and whispering corridors waited. The place where the Watcher had vanished. But before I could ask anything else, he collapsed. Guests gasped. One woman fainted into the arms of another. The quartet abandoned their instruments entirely. I knelt beside him, checking his pulse. Alive but fading, and that's when I realized something chilling. He wasn't stabbed, not attacked. He had been poisoned. A slow-acting toxin, one that drained strength and left no immediate marks. The glove had been an accident, dropped in shock, not during a struggle. And the poison? Delivered some time earlier, perhaps before the masquerade even began. Which meant he was never the killer. He was the second victim. The first lie of the night revealed itself. The bloodstained glove was a misdirection, a planted suggestion, a carefully crafted false lead. Someone wanted me to follow him, to corner him, to believe he was the one hiding behind a mask. But the true killer was already a step ahead. The fox mask returns. The guest's panic deepened into a murmur of fear that trembled like a low hum beneath the chandeliers. And in that rising unease, I noticed someone emerge from behind the crowd. The fox mask, the one who had vanished from the ballroom earlier. The one whose stillness had unsettled me from the start. They walked toward me with a measured calm, their gait steady, their hands gloved, their movements too controlled. The silver-masked victim groaned faintly at their approach, not in fear, but in recognition. Recognition, a warning, a connection. I straightened. The fox mask stopped 5 steps away. They tilted their head, not left, not right, but downward toward the glove in my hand. Then they looked up, but in that moment, just one heartbeat, they touched the side of their mask. Not to remove it, not to adjust it, to tap it, softly, twice, as though giving me a message without speaking, a signal. I narrowed my eyes. The fox mask turned and melted back into the crowd. No struggle, no panic, just disappearance, effortless, practiced. And when I looked back at the silver-masked victim, his hand had curled around my sleeve. He whispered a single word, barely audible. Library. His body slackened as consciousness fled him. The library, one of the manor's oldest rooms. A place where secrets were archived, where old records were kept, where the truth didn't hide, but waited. The fox mask knew I would follow that lead. The question was, were they guiding me to the truth, or guiding me away from it? The library was at the far end of the east wing, past a rusted suit of armor and 2 massive double doors carved with serpentine sigils. The moment I touched the brass handle, a faint static tremor passed through my fingers. Something or someone had been here recently. I pushed the door open. That should have greeted me. Silence should have welcomed me. Stillness should have settled around me. But none of that happened. A fire burned quietly in the hearth, crackling with slow, consistent snaps. Shadows danced across towering bookshelves that curved like the ribs of an enormous beast. The air smelled faintly of cedar and ink, the scent of ancient stories. And then I saw it. A book lay open on the central mahogany table. Not placed, not dropped, presented. Its pages yellowed, edges worn, its script handwritten in heavy strokes. I approached carefully, expecting another riddle or warning. But instead, the page showed a diagram of masks. Dozens of designs, each labeled, each associated with a person, a name, a role, a ledger of identities. And one name was circled violently, ink slashed across it again and again until the paper tore. The name beneath the ink scars read, The Watcher, not a role, a title, a position within the masquerade. A guardian? A spy? Or the killer? I lifted the book. The pages beneath were missing, ripped out violently. Footsteps echoed behind me. I turned. The door was closing on its own, as though someone unseen had pushed it, as though someone didn't want me to leave just yet. And then, a voice drifted from the shadows of the upper balcony within the library, soft, distorted, neither male nor female. Do you understand now? I froze. The voice was not a whisper. It was a presence. I raised the book slowly. Understand what? I asked. A pause. A silence thick enough to choke the air. That every mask hides a truth. And every truth demands a sacrifice. A cold gust swept through the room, extinguishing the fire in the hearth. Darkness swallowed everything. And from above, something fell to the floor. A mask. A cracked, slightly familiar mask. The Watcher's mask. Only one question pulsed inside me. Had someone removed it? Or had it been taken by force? I continued walking, letting the mist curl around my ankles like something alive, like something thinking. The night no longer felt like a backdrop. It felt like a participant leaning in, listening, waiting for my next step. The town's abandoned promenade stretched before me. Its once grand arcades reduced to hollowed-out bones that whispered with the slightest breeze. My breath came in slow, controlled streams, not out of calm, but out of a growing awareness that whatever I was following was also following me. You can sense these things when you've spent long enough in the dark, when silence becomes the language you understand, and footsteps can be heard even when they aren't made. I passed beneath a broken lantern, its glass shattered, its metal twisted as if it had experienced something violent, something abrupt. The faint glimmer it managed to produce flickered like a heartbeat, brightening just long enough for me to see something on the ground. A feather, not just any feather. Midnight black, silky, curved at the edges, like it belonged to the same kind of mask the corpse had worn. A clue, fresh, dropped not long ago. But here's the problem. The masquerade ended 5 hours ago. The guests had all left the ballroom, some stumbling into the cold night, others disappearing in chauffeured cars and tinted windows. And the man whose mask had been violently removed, well, he certainly didn't walk here to leave a trail behind. So who dropped this feather? I leaned down, careful, letting my fingers hover above the object without touching it. Something in the air around it felt wrong, warm, almost like a faint heat radiated from its strands. As though the person who left it had only just gone. Before I could gather my thoughts, the wind shifted, carrying with it a sense so distinct, so sharp, I felt it cut through memory like a razor's edge. Peppermint and smoke. A strange combination, unsettling and unmistakable. I had smelled it earlier in the ballroom, right before I found the body. A figure had brushed past me then. Tall, deliberate, masked in silver, moving with a calm assuredness that contrasted too sharply with the panic simmering beneath the gala's glittering surface. Clue 1, unintentionally given. And now, here it was again, drifting across the abandoned promenade like a signature. I straightened, feeling the fog thicken behind me. The hairs on my arms rose. Not from cold, from proximity. Someone was near, but I did not turn around. Not yet. Turning too soon gives away that you're aware. And awareness, in a situation like this, is a weapon that loses its edge the moment it's revealed. Instead, I listened. The soundscape narrowed. The world tightened. And somewhere behind me, beneath the wind, underneath the hum of distant streetlights, I heard. Breathing. Slow. Almost steady. But not natural. It was too controlled, too measured. Like someone was trying not to be heard, but couldn't help slipping into audibility. I let my voice drop to a whisper, not for them, but for myself, because sometimes naming the fear keeps it from becoming something else entirely. You followed me, didn't you? No answer, but the breathing paused, and then resumed. I turned, slow, precise, as if pivoting underwater. The fog parted enough for me to see the faint silhouette of a figure standing just beyond the pool of broken lantern light. Not fully concealed, not fully revealed. Their posture was straight, their presence intentional. I took one step toward them. They took one step back, not fleeing, but matching, mirroring, like a reflection that had decided it no longer wished to exist inside the mirror. Who are you? I asked. Still no answer. But I saw something change, a subtle shift, a tilt of the head, the slightest movement that told me they were studying me just as carefully as I was studying them. And then, very slowly, they lifted a hand. And it was another feather. This one white. Pristine. Soft as a sigh. The opposite of the one at my feet. Two halves of something whole. Two pieces of a puzzle not yet assembled. The figure held the white feather up as though offering it, and then, in one fluid motion, let it fall. The feather drifted downward, dancing through the air, spinning like a tiny omen. By the time it touched the ground, the figure was gone. Not running footsteps, not hurried movement, just gone, as though the air had folded around them and reclaimed the shape. I stepped forward, heart pounding not from fear, but from recognition. This was no ordinary misdirection. This was a message, a silent, deliberate message from someone who knew exactly what they were doing. But a message about what? And why me? The white feather glowed faintly in the lantern's flicker. I didn't touch it. Not yet. Because something about the familiarity of this moment, this manipulation, this breadcrumb trail of symbols, stirred something I hadn't felt in years. A memory. A case I failed to solve. A victim whose mask I never found. And a killer who always left feathers behind. One black, one white. A killer who disappeared 8 years ago. A killer the world forgot. A killer who never made a mistake. Until now. Or maybe this wasn't a mistake at all. Maybe this was an invitation. I remained there for a long moment. Long enough for the fog to swallow the shape of the vanished stranger. Long enough for the air to settle back into its unnatural stillness. But something inside me refused to settle. The old memory that had come clawing to the surface would not retreat again. 8 years. 8 years without a trace. Without a whisper. Without a body or a clue or a feather. Yet now, 2 feathers in a single night. 2 deliberate gestures. 2 doors opening back to a past I had buried. I crouched slowly, letting my hand hover above the white feather the same way I had hovered over the black one. This feather, however, radiated an entirely different energy. Cool, almost chilled, as if it had been lifted from a shadowed place untouched by warmth. The killer, if this was truly them, had always left 2 feathers behind at every scene. But never together, never close, always far apart, forcing me to walk the distance between them, forcing me to feel the silence of the space between clues that had been part of their craft, making the investigator participate unwillingly in the choreography of the crime. And here I was again, walking their pattern, following their rhythm, re-entering their design. That realization alone made my pulse sharp, because killers like that don't come back by accident. They return for reasons, and their reasons are never gentle. I rose, the fog whispering as it brushed against my coat. The promenade stretched ahead, empty, abandoned, and strangely expectant, as if the entire street had been arranged as a stage for what was coming next. As I stepped away from the feathers, I noticed something that hadn't been visible before, a faint trail in the condensation on the cobblestones. Not footprints exactly, too light for that. More like a subtle disruption in the moisture, the kind you'd only see if you stared long enough or believed strongly enough that something was meant to be seen. I followed, one step, then another. The trail wove between the old iron benches and the cracked fountains, leading deeper into the silent heart of the promenade. A cold breeze slipped under my collar, brushing the back of my neck in a way that felt intentional, almost intimate, as though the night itself was leaning in to whisper something I wasn't ready to hear. The scent of peppermint smoke returned, faint, thin, drifting along the path like a guiding thread. Clue or trap? With this killer, the answer was always both. The trail curved sharply and stopped before an old wooden kiosk, its windows boarded, its paint peeling in long strips. I approached slowly, aware of how easily a place like this could conceal someone or something. The peppermint smell was stronger now. I placed my palm against the kiosk door. It was warm, alive warm. Something had been inside recently, or was still there. I listened. At first, nothing. Then a creak, a whisper of movement. Soft, rhythmic, breathing. I inhaled once, quiet as I could, and pushed the door open. It swung inward with the slow complaint of rusted hinges, revealing a cramped, shadow-drenched interior. Dust motes floated in the thin strips of light slipping through the slats. And in the center of the kiosk, illuminated by a narrow beam from the moonlit gaps above, sat a wooden chair. Empty, but on it, carefully placed, perfectly centered, was a mask. Not the mask worn by the murdered man at the masquerade. Not the mask of the silver figure I'd glimpsed earlier. This mask was different. Porcelain white, smooth, blank, expressionless. A reflection of nothing. A canvas of everything. And beneath the mask, pinned to the chair with a thin black hairpin, was a single folded note. My hands did not shake as I picked it up, but my heartbeat did. The front of the note was blank. No name, no sigil, no symbol from the killer's past pattern. Just the note itself. I unfolded it slowly. Inside, written in sparse ink strokes that cut across the page like thin blades, were 5 words. You never solved it. Look again. My throat tightened. Not from fear, but from recognition. This handwriting, this tone, this taunt, it wasn't from the killer. It was from someone else. Someone who had been there 8 years ago. Someone who had watched me fail the first time. Someone who knew more than they should. Someone who was still alive. And someone who had been at the masquerade tonight. The porcelain mask stared up at me from the chair, empty and patient, as if waiting for me to understand something I wasn't meant to understand yet. But one thing was suddenly clear. The murder at the masquerade was not just a new crime. It was a continuation, a resurrection, a second act to a play I never knew had an intermission. And whoever wrote this note wanted me to see something I had missed 8 years ago. Something I was being forced to face again. Not later. Now.